Welcome in to the Whole Hog pregame show. I am Seth Campbell, joining you via Zoom this time. We're going to do this a little bit differently. That way we're a little bit socially distant and just staying safe that way. I'm going to be joined first by Scottie, Bordelon writer for WholeHogSports.com. And Scottie, let's just get right into it. The Razorbacks, well, they played okay against A&M, but they had an emerging character, somebody they had missed for a while in Rakeem Boyd. He was able to step up, rush for over 100 yards. Now, the big question is can he repeat that again against a good Tennessee team?
Yeah, that's kind of the big deal. And you want to see, we've heard Sam Pittman talk about Tennessee is kind of built in the same way that Texas A&M is. They're good up front on the offensive line and the defensive line. So, maybe it's trying to establish Rakeem Boyd in the run game. That's gonna be pretty pivotal, I think, because you don't want to just rely on Felipe Franks throwing the ball to Traylon Burks 20 times, as exciting as that might turn out to be. Just, if Arkansas's offensive line can get good push off the ball, explode off the ball, and blow Tennessee's defensive linemen back a few yards, I think we might see a similar performance from Rakeem that we did against Texas A&M when he went over 100 yards for the first time this season. It was good to see him getting back to, he's kind of stretching his legs a little bit in the run game. Like a lot of his carries have gone for either negative yardage or, 4 or 5 yards. And I think his longest run going into that game was 8 yards. And I think he had 5 or 6 carries of that distance or longer. And so he got his legs stretched out a little bit, which was good to see. And, Traylon Smith, I don't have any doubt would be, ready to assume some carries if Rakeem gets tired. And I think that run game is going to be a really big key.
I think we mentioned this on the reaction show on the podcast, Scottie, but it would just seem good to have Boyd hit the hole and hit it hard.
Yeah.
Whether that was the ability for him not to be tackled behind the line of scrimmage, like you mentioned, a lot of times it happened. But the fact of the offensive line was giving him that time, but he also looked healthy enough to hit those holes full speed and really gain some forward momentum. So that way, when he is hit, he's able to fall forward. And that's the Rakeem Boyd of old that we saw last year. Just being able to hit those holes hard and explode. He had a lot of long runs last year. He hadn't had one yet, as long as, a long touchdown run yet, but still waiting for that part. And maybe he can break one off against Tennessee. If he can, that would be a huge help to the Arkansas side of things, especially that Arkansas offense. Because whenever they can run the ball, that makes everything just a lot more effective.
Yeah, one other thing on Rakeem, I think we saw him a lot healthier than he had been against Ole Miss. He really wasn't himself. And I mean, we pointed out the things that we saw that indicate that. But a couple of things I saw was against A&M, he was able to use his speed and those fresh legs to get to the edge and then cut up field, for some 8, 9, 10-yard runs. And then the 14-yard touchdown run that he had, that's big for your confidence. I mean, I know that was only an important touchdown for people who like to gamble and for Arkansas itself. But I think that can be a confidence boosting, momentum building play for Rakeem. I expect him to come out and run hard again, run physical, and kind of get back to, like you said, the Rakeem of old, where he's making a few more defenders miss.
Well, expectations have been huge for the Razorbacks on the defensive side of the ball after the performance they put up against Ole Miss. That obviously wasn't repeated against A&M for some obvious reasons that we've hit on multiple times over the podcast and on WholeHogSports.com, and just the fact that A&M is a completely different team than Ole Miss and a lot better team than the Ole Miss Rebels as well. But the defense, is looking to bounce back, and they do have a good opportunity against Jarrett Garantano. He's a guy that's prone to mistakes. He's a lot more has a lot more Matt Corral in him, Ole Miss quarterback, than Kellen Mond, the Texas A&M quarterbacks. How are the Razorbacks going to get him off balance and try and force some of those turnovers that the defense has thrived on?
Yeah, that's just like the running game, man. That's one of the bigger keys to the game. You've got to knock Garantano off his spot and make him a little bit uncomfortable. It's like you said, he is a little bit turnover prone, and he will offer defenses some interceptable passes that they can, not only pick off, but take the other way. Like we saw that against Tennessee. I think he threw 2 pick sixes in that game. I think it obviously it starts up front, but it's kind of twofold. Like Arkansas's defensive line, I feel like it kind of starts with Jonathan Marshall in the middle. He's the guy. I think he's second in the SEC among defensive linemen in quarterback hurries, which is impressive. It's kind of him carrying that weight room strength onto the field and just kind of moving bodies around. I mean, he's taking on double teams and he's winning those battles. That's big, right at the point of attack in the middle of your line. And then Julius Coates played, according to Sam Pittman, his best game at Texas A&M. Can he build on that? He's a guy he's got all the tools. He's physically imposing. He's got pretty good length, and I think he knows that the only way that you can beat some of those talented offensive linemen, 5-star offensive linemen, veteran, experienced guys that Tennessee has up front, you got to be efficient with your moves, and you got to trust your work and what your coaches have told you. And Sam Pittman said he saw, a Julius Coates that played with a better motor against Texas A&M. I think he only had 1 tackle, but he was powerful, and he was, plays didn't really come to him all that often, but he's making things happen with his matchup, and maybe making running backs kind of reverse course a little bit. He's going to be big if he can get in the backfield and create some havoc plays. That's big. And the second part of that is just Arkansas's linebackers in the secondary. It just kind of goes hand in hand. Can Arkansas's linebackers be a little bit more assignment sound when they're playing zone and not, play at the improper depth? I think Sam Pittman talked about that a couple of times with, Bumper Pool was out of position a little bit on some of those Kellen Mond completions. It kind of goes hand in hand, but I think it all starts with Julius Coates and Jonathan Marshall. Those 2 guys are going to play a big role.
All right, Scottie, we talked a little bit about offense, a little bit about defense. Now it's time for you to make that prediction. Who do you have?
Yeah, I've got Traylon Burks going for 100 yards because it's Saturday.
Exactly.
And I've got Arkansas winning 28-20. I think Arkansas will kind of use that Texas A&M game defensively as a little bit of a blueprint for like, hey, here's what we've got to do to be better. And Texas A&M, I don't think Tennessee's clearly they don't have the passing game that Texas A&M has, but their run game and their offensive line is pretty solid. Tennessee's got 2 running backs in the top 10 in rushing yards per game through 5 games, and no other team in the SEC has that. So corralling those 2 guys and limiting those big runs, I think both of those guys have a pretty good percentage of carries that have resulted in 7 to 10 yards. So if Arkansas can collectively slow those guys down and make Jim Chaney call a few pass plays and make Jarrett Garantano a little bit uncomfortable, I like their chances. But I think Felipe Franks plays, I think he carries some of that road success that we've talked about ad nauseum the last few weeks into a home game where he's been so-so against a really good defense and a pretty bad defense. So big day from Felipe, big day from Traylon Burks. I think you can get used to that as the back half of the season gets here. And I think Arkansas is going to get out over the win. And I think it'll send Arkansas into those final few games with a bunch of confidence.
Yeah, the Razorbacks could, if they come out of here with a win, 4 games and 4 wins, in the SEC, looking awfully likely if they could sneak one against LSU or Missouri. That would be a fantastic season. I mean, 2 wins is already above expectations, you feel like. And then if they can sneak in double that, man, you got to feel like you made the right hire with Sam Pittman. Although you already kind of do, you definitely got to be feeling good about yourself after that. Well, Scottie, thanks so much for joining us here on the WholeHog podcast. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Matt Jones will join us to talk about the Tennessee Volunteers. Welcome in to the WholeHog pregame show. I am Seth Campbell, joined by Matt Jones, and we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into the Tennessee Volunteers and what they bring to the table against the Arkansas Razorbacks as those two teams play on Saturday. All right, Matt, let's just start with the quarterback play for the Tennessee Volunteers. Jarrett Garantano has been prone to mistakes this entire year. What should the Razorbacks expect from the redshirt senior starting quarterback for Tennessee?
Well, I think that's the question, right? I mean, he's been kind of unpredictable throughout his career at Tennessee. You look at their games this year. In the 2 games that they won, he didn't commit a turnover. And in the last 3 games, he's had 3 fumbles and 3 interceptions. And, the Volunteers have, against Kentucky, they had 2 pick sixes that were returned for touchdowns. Alabama scored a non-offensive touchdown against Kentucky. Georgia scored a non-offensive. I mean, they've had 4 non-offensive touchdowns scored on them over the last 3 games. And so a lot of that's due to the play of Garantano, whether it be an interception or, I think in the Georgia game, it was a strip sack that they took back for a touchdown. He's been very inconsistent, and it's a lot different, I feel like, from a quarterback perspective than last week against Texas A&M, where you've seen Kellen Mond grow up and get more consistent and more steady as his career's gone on. I don't know that you can really say that about Garantano, but he does have the potential, I mean, as we all know, to have big games. And so you don't know what Garantano you're going to get. If it's the Garantano who's turnover prone, then I think Arkansas's got to like its chances of winning Saturday night. And if it's the Garantano, who's played after some, you look at his career, his 2 best games have come after bye weeks, against Auburn in 2018 and at Missouri last year. And both of those games were on the road. He did have a game where he struggled against Georgia last year after a bye week too. But if you get this Garantano who has been good after bye weeks, then all of a sudden, maybe Tennessee's got a chance to come in here and win Saturday night like they're expected to do.
Ole Miss had good Bo, bad Bo, and they had Bo Wallace at quarterback. It's kind of the same thing for Tennessee. Not as catchy, though. Good Jarrett and bad Jarrett.
Yeah.
Sam Pittman has mentioned multiple times this week that he is familiar with Jim Chaney, the offensive coordinator for Tennessee, and he said that if Chaney could, he would line up every single down and run the ball.
Yep.
How do the Razorbacks match up against Tennessee in the run game?
Yeah, I think Sam said that if Jim Chaney could, he'd run it 81 times a game. And, hey, we saw it here at Arkansas. He was the offensive coordinator under Brett Bielema for his first 2 years in 2013 and 14. And, one of the reasons I think that there was, a departure there is that Arkansas wanted to be able to throw the ball more. And you saw that happen in 2015 when Dan Enos came in, and Brandon Allen probably had the best season ever by an Arkansas passer. I think they're going to run the ball. I think that that's who they want to be. They want to be a run-first offense. I think you'll see, kind of like A&M last week, that they are going to use the run to try to set up the play-action game. I don't think they're as polished as Texas A&M was offensively. That's not to say that they can't be, successful on offense. I just don't think that they're quite like Texas A&M. They're kind of they're not quite A&M. They're not quite Georgia. They're somewhere, maybe what we saw in the 3rd quarter against Georgia, if that makes any sense. Capable, but are they consistent? I don't know. They've got a really good offensive line. They've got a couple of running backs that they like to rotate in and kind of split the carries. One of their running backs, Eric Gray, is also one of their primary pass catchers. They'll target him. Wouldn't be surprised to see them target him 3, 5, 6 times in the passing game on Saturday. They've got a good playmaker in Josh Palmer. They've got a freshman who's made some big plays this year, just not a lot of them. But I think he's leading the SEC in yards per catch right now. Palmer's always been a big play threat. So there's some weapons there, but again, they've just been inconsistent. And I think that's kind of been the story throughout Jim Chaney's, tenure as a coordinator in the SEC, right? There have been some games where his offenses look like world beaters. And when that's the case, it's been because they've been able to run the ball. And so I'll be interested to see what Arkansas does this week in trying to stop the run. I do think that there's something to be said, though, Seth, for Sam Pittman and even Barry Odom. Remember, Barry Odom has been a head coach against Chaney before, a coordinator against Chaney. I think Odom was the defensive coordinator, well, I guess he wouldn't have been the defensive coordinator when they played Arkansas, but he's seen him, I guess is where I'm trying to go there. So there is some familiarity with him, and I'll be interested to see, if there's some tendencies that show up, that if we hear from the coaching staff after the game that says, we were able to capitalize on something, we knew that they like to do on 3rd and 4. That'll be something that's interesting to watch Saturday night.
You talked a little bit about inconsistencies, and as we flip to the other side of the ball, that has been the Tennessee defense. Their first 2 games, the 2 games that they've won, they allowed 27 points and 12 points. And then you look at their last 3 games, these 3 games that they've lost, they've allowed 44, 34, and 48 points. What has been the Tennessee Volunteers' Achilles heel this year?
Well, one of the things that's hurt them has been the turnovers has put their defense in bad situations. And actually, if you adjust the non-offensive touchdowns, then I think they go from like 11th to 7th in the SEC in scoring defense. I mean, you think about the Kentucky game. Kentucky scored 34 points, but they had 2 pick sixes, and I think they had another fumble that set up a field goal. So that's half of their points right there have been set up by mistakes by the Tennessee offense. And so I think they're probably a little bit better than those points per game stats would allow, or would maybe indicate. Alabama and Georgia, they're going to have some success against teams. You look at the first half of the Georgia game, though, Tennessee played pretty well defensively. It wasn't until the second half where there were some turnovers, put them in some bad situations, and then the wheels just kind of came off, in the 3rd and 4th quarters. I think that game was played in Athens too, and that probably played a factor in how that game went. So I think they're an okay team. I'm going to mess up his name, but they've got a linebacker, Henry, I think it's To'o, and he's one of the leading tacklers in the SEC this year. He's a really good player. They've got a big, strong defensive front. I think they're going to look somewhat like Georgia defensively. Jeremy Pruitt comes out of that Nick Saban coaching tree like Kirby Smart did, like Will Muschamp did at South Carolina. I think that, concept-wise, it's going to be similar to some of the things Georgia did. And they've got some big defensive linemen, and they've got some capable defensive linemen. I just don't know that they've got the ability to rotate them in and out like Georgia did. And I think that's what really sets Georgia apart is, Georgia's got this great starting 11 on its defense, but they've got a second 11 with probably 6, 7, 8 players who are going to be NFL players one day. And Tennessee doesn't have that kind of depth yet. But I think schematically it's going to be something similar to what we saw against Georgia. Try to, get pressure with 3, drop 4 linebackers back, and then, disguise some blitzes, bring some blitzes, especially on passing downs.
You mentioned kind of the front 7 for that Tennessee defense. The Hogs finally got some success against a pretty good Texas A&M defense, some success running the ball. How do you see that matchup playing out in this game? Arkansas running the ball versus Tennessee's defense.
I think Arkansas is going to run the ball okay. We'll see. I don't know if they'll have a 100-yard rusher. I thought Rakeem Boyd, there were a couple of times down at College Station where it looked, okay, that looks like the Rakeem Boyd of old. But, there's still some inconsistencies along Arkansas's offensive front. I mean, have they figured out, do they want Ty Clary or Ricky Stromberg to play center? Do they want Ty Clary or Bo Limber to play right guard? I think Luke Jones, got some snaps against Texas A&M last week at the other guard position. So, and they still haven't been real great at right tackle, regardless of who they put there. And so I think a lot of it depends on the play of the offensive line. The offensive line played pretty well against Texas A&M. Can they repeat that performance this week? And, one of the things, and we'll talk about this here in just a second, is in our prediction. But one of the things that stands out to me is that Tennessee was able to watch that A&M game live, and they didn't have a game last week. And I think that, that preparation, that bye week, it's so beneficial to a team, I think, to be able to watch a game live, and you're able to see things in real time that maybe don't stand out to you on film. You're able to hear things with the TV cameras that maybe you're not hearing with the film study. And, those little things I think could help Tennessee. Are they able to pick up some things that Arkansas was doing with its offensive line last week? Like everything else, that's something to watch Saturday.
All right, you mentioned it, you teased it, Matt. Let's get to it. The prediction for Arkansas versus Tennessee.
Well, I went back and forth on it, on who I thought would win. I definitely think Arkansas is playing well. I picked Arkansas in most of their games this year. I think they're a good team. But I'm picking Tennessee. I think, Tennessee for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's the bye week. They've been pretty good out of bye weeks under Jeremy Pruitt. The biggest win in his career to this point was at Auburn 2 years ago. That was a big win for them. And now that wasn't the greatest Auburn team, but it wasn't a bad Auburn team too, or either. And so I think they've been good out of bye weeks. I think that, you get to this point in the season and having, that time to rest is a big deal. The other reason that I think Tennessee is going to be really motivated to play this game, and it's not to say Arkansas won't be, but I think this is a big game for Jeremy Pruitt's future at Tennessee. I mean, he's what 15 and 16 through through 3 seasons, 2.5 seasons there in Knoxville. I don't think those are the type of results that people expected to this point in his career, and certainly not results like they've had the last 3 games where they've lost to Georgia's a rival, Kentucky's a rival, Alabama's a rival, and they've lost those 3 games by a combined 81 points. And so I think there's some pressure there for them to perform this week. There's some pressure, for Pruitt and his coaching staff to have their players ready. I think, from a quarterback perspective, Jarrett Garantano, there's been some challenges by Pruitt, even in the media, that he might make a quarterback change at some point this year. There's some pressure on Jarrett Garantano to play well. And so I just think that with all of that said, that Tennessee, unless there's some sort of big injury or some sort of deal with COVID that knocks out a lot of starters, I just think that there's a big incentive for Tennessee to play well this week. And so I think it's a toss-up. If there's turnovers, that can change the game in a hurry. But just on paper and with the bye week really playing a big role in my mind, Tennessee probably something like 27-21. I expect every Arkansas game to be low scoring at this point. Like they had a game at College Station last week. To me, that felt like an anomaly. I just feel like Arkansas, at least in order to win, Arkansas is going to have to win games like 24-21, 21-17, kind of like they did in Starkville. Those are because they've had defensive touchdowns that have really changed their games. And otherwise, this has still been kind of a real inconsistent offense.
Scottie went with Arkansas. Matt, you're going with Tennessee. I think that you're exactly right. Tennessee plays well off of the bye week and the fact that this is a big game for Jeremy Pruitt. If you look at the rest of the schedule as well, the Volunteers are talking about how they want to get off and kind of replicate off of what they did last year in the second half of the season and going on a big winning streak, and they want to do that again this year. Well, if you take a look at their schedule, they play teams like Auburn, I believe is on their schedule. Let's see, I have it pulled up here. They after Arkansas, they play A&M, they play Auburn, they play Vanderbilt, and then they play Florida. So it doesn't really get a lot easier after this. And so if you are the Tennessee Volunteers, like you got to circle this one as really a must-have for the rest of the season.
It might be the difference, Seth, between them going 500 this year and having a losing record.
And if you're the Volunteers, having a losing record in year 3 of Jeremy Pruitt is not what you had envisioned when you hired him as the head coach and the recruits that he's bringing in. So I think this is a big game. Before this week, I picked Arkansas to win, and so I'm going to stick with that pick. I think it was 28-24 or around there is what I said. So I will stick with it. But with all that being said, this is a very big game for the Tennessee Volunteers, and Arkansas is going to have to come out and match the physicalness and the urgency that Tennessee is going to play with, because I have a feeling that they're going to come out really trying to get this win in Fayetteville.
28-24, there have been a couple of these games that have ended in that score. One for both teams, pretty memorable for both.
Yes, exactly. Clint Sterner involved in both of them.
Yep.
All right. Well, Matt, thanks so much for joining us here on the Pregame Show.
All right. Appreciate it, Seth.
Yeah. Well, for Matt Jones and Scottie Bordelon, I am Seth Campbell saying so long. We thank you so much for watching, and we will see you back here next week.